So, the Hebrew calendar has 12 or 13 months, depending on the year. And you add the leap months to bring things up to date. Why is all of this important? Well, we realized we had this day called Passover, and it was on the 14th day of the month of Nisan. And so you ask the question, why are there 2 New Years in the Jewish calendar? When the Exodus happened on the 14th day of Nisan, N-I-S-A-N, not S-S-A-N, like the car. Yeah, like that. It's spelled both ways. You can spell it either way. On the 14th day of this month, that's the first Passover. And so God says to the children of Israel, this is going to be the first of the year for you. So there is, if you will, an ecclesiastical year that begins in the month of Nisan. And then there is the actual lunar solar New Year, which happens at the Feast of Trumpets. So you have 2 completely different New Year's celebrations, and one is the civil New Year, and the other is the religious New Year, the ecclesiastical New Year, if you will. So, 14th day of Nisan, Passover happens. Jews leave Israel. Egypt, I'm sorry. So they're out of Egypt, and a lot happens in the first year. We know they leave Egypt, and Goshen is here. So one of the traditions is that they cross the Red Sea here, one that they cross the Red Sea here, one that they cross the Red Sea here. This is the traditional Mount Sinai, which we know is almost certainly not the real Sinai. And just to keep things straight, the reason we call this the Sinai Peninsula is because somebody said that's Mount Sinai. We don't call this the Sinai Peninsula because Mount Sinai is in it. Somebody said this was Mount Sinai. Catherine, Constantine's mother, said she had a dream and God told her this was Sinai. So let it be a world without end. Amen. Done. That's Sinai. Well, no, it's not. It's almost certainly not. And so we talked about it, and Sinai is really either right in here on the backside of the desert from Midian, or perhaps somewhere further over here. But it's on this northern route, not down in the southern Sinai Peninsula. So there's some things we can say with pretty good certainty. This is not Sinai. Sinai is probably somewhere up here, but we don't know exactly where. We cannot say with certainty. There are some that say it's down here in Midian. They found a place they think fits. I don't agree. I don't think it's down here. I think it's right about here or over here. One of those 2 places is the real Sinai. Bottom line is, we don't know with certainty where Sinai is. Now, here's the thing. We believe that there's a God who created heaven and earth. And so if God created heaven and earth, and he thought it was important for us to know where Sinai was, there would, by golly, be a pole sticking out of the ground with a sign that said Sinai on it. We'd know where it was if God thought it was important. The fact that we don't know tells us something about what God thinks about it.
Don't worship there.
He doesn't want us to know where it is, because that's the mountain where he spoke to Moses. And he doesn't want us to make the spot a shrine. So there is a reason why Scripture is silent on the exact location of Sinai. But completely ignoring that, Constantine's mother says, I'm going to go on a pilgrimage and I'm going to find Sinai. There it is, God told me in a dream.
That tells you that you're not supposed to listen to your mother-in-law.
Don't
Say
tell
that
Lily
once
that.
again a little louder.
No, I said all I need to say. All the women laughed.
Okay. Okay, so Sinai's up there. The Jews leave Egypt. They travel somewhere. They cross the Red Sea somewhere. And again, we've talked about this. It doesn't really matter where they cross the Red Sea. And people say, 2.5 million people. It'd take them days to cross the Red Sea. Well, okay. That's fine. If God wants to make a hole in the Red Sea big enough to march 2.5 million people abreast in one rank, He can do that. Remember, He created the universe. So we most of the arguments about, well, that just doesn't make sense, really what we're saying is, I don't think God could do that. And the answer is, well, God speaks and universes come into existence. And you think parting the sea so 2.5 million people can get across in one day is a big deal for Him. It's just not. And so I refuse to limit God. I don't know where they crossed the Red Sea. He doesn't tell us. I wonder why. But He does tell us they crossed the Red Sea. My guess is somewhere here in the Gulf of Suez. It's conceivable that they crossed a small river here and crossed the Red Sea here in the Gulf of Aqaba. Conceivable. And that Sinai is somewhere over here. But we know that Sinai is not here because that's not the backside of the desert from Midian. Matter of fact, it's not the backside of any desert from anywhere. But if you go up here, these mountains are the backside of the desert from Midian. Makes sense that it would be here. It could conceivably be over here. I doubt that it's over here because it's too close to Pharaoh. It's too close to Egypt.
Didn't God tell them not to go by the well-traveled?
By the way of the sea.
Yeah.
He tells them. So this is the one route we know they didn't take. And that's the easy road.
Yes.
Exactly. So you're exactly correct. God says, do not go by the way of the Philistines. Or by the way of the sea, it was called at the time. The Philistines weren't that big a deal. Sorry, I can't get that any sharper. Okay, so a lot happens in that first year. We leave Egypt, we get across here, we're somewhere at Mount Sinai, wherever that is. Okay? And we spend a year there. A lot happens during that year. Okay? So during that first year, we have the Exodus begins, 15 Nisan actually, the way we would count it. They're packing up, walking out. They arrive at Mount Sinai sometime during that year. At Mount Sinai, Moses receives the Ten Commandments. Comes down, breaks the tablets, goes back up, gets new ones, comes down. The golden calf happens. A lot's going on during this first year. God goes back up into the mountain, He gets the law. And then He comes down and He has all the people gather around the mountain. And they say, don't let God speak to us. You go talk to God, don't talk to us because that'll kill us. So you talk to God, you come talk to us. And so Moses has the elders of the tribes come closer to him. By the way, think of this as a legislative body. And as we study more in the Old Testament, you realize that these elders of the tribes of Israel, they're the Congress. They're the legislative branch, if you will. And they kind of ratify things on behalf of the people. So when God brings the law down, And he says, okay, we're gonna have a covenant meal, and God himself takes the sacrifice, and the elders of Israel with Moses at the foot of the mountain, not on the mountain, but at the foot of the mountain. They meet there. God's on the mountain, Moses comes from God, the elders of Israel, and the elders sit there and share a covenant meal with Moses. And the people, through their leaders, ratify the constitution of the nation of Israel, which we call the Law of Moses. So this is the constitution of the nation, and they've signed up for it. So God now starts to deal with them on the basis of this covenant relationship. And as part of that, he says, okay, now I want you to build a place for me to live in the midst of you. Remember, Moses' tent is outside the camp. God says, I'm going to live in the midst of the camp. And so they begin the preparations for the tabernacle. They make the collections. They have all the materials. The golden calf happens. And the tablets are broken. The tablets are made again. All of this is all happening in the first year. So at the end of the first year, the tabernacle is finished. The tabernacle is erected. And then we have the singular moment when God himself comes and kind of sets his seal on the place. And we're told the smoke is so thick. Now remember, Moses is used to going in and out from the presence of the Lord. His tent outside the camp. Now the tent of meeting is moved inside the camp. Can you talk to Nathan, honey?
Mm-hmm.
That's about picking up the guys at the airport this afternoon, I'm sure.
Hi, this is Sue Ellen Bobby's teaching right now.
So that completely broke my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Really? Oh.
Okay.
So at one point.
One of the things I want us to remember about the law is that in a way, the law of Moses is a commentary on the Ten Commandments. So think of the Ten Commandments as the Declaration of Independence and the law as the Constitution.
Okay, thank you. So
This is who we are and how we act in those Ten Commandments. And the Constitution just kind of fills that up and explains it in a full way, how we're going to be God's people in the nations.
Their flight comes in an hour early, so they're coming at 1:30 instead
Okay.
of 2:30.
Not a problem. Thank you, Nathan. And thank you for taking that. Okay, so back to this again. We want to look at the dates in the book of Numbers. So if you start at the first of the book and go through the book, chapter 1, verse 1, on the first day of the second month of the second year. Okay, so we know the tabernacle was finished and erected on the first day of the first month of the second year. So this is 1 month later. This follows the erection of the tabernacle by 1 month. Chapter 7, verse 1, the first day of the first month of the second year. So that is before the first reference. So we know Numbers is not chronologically written. It's just not. So let's understand that that's the way it is. It's written down in kind of episodes to show us certain things. So we do a flashback starting in chapter 7, goes all the way into chapter 10, and about this starting in the first day of the first month of the second year. So that's the day the tabernacle was completed, erected, and filled. Okay? Then the next date is in chapter 9, in the first month of the second year. Okay, so this also precedes chapter 1. So
Can we do some editing on Numbers so they get in chronological order, really?
No, we,
okay, there you
I
go.
wish I had
Something like this?
a Bible that has
Yes,
it in.
thank you.
Would you like something like that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Okay, so you set up the tabernacle on Nisan 1. Now you see why I put the calendar up there? Okay. On Nisan 1, the tabernacle is set up. Nisan 1 through 12, actually it probably should be 2 through 12, each tribe brings its gift to the tabernacle. 12 days, 12 tribes. Then on the 13th day, the priests are ordained. Okay, so tabernacle is filled. People bring their gifts to the tabernacle. The priests are ordained. That's the 13th. The next day, after the priests are ordained, Passover begins. And then the next month, the month of Iyar, the census begins. So go back to chapter 1, verse 1. On the first day of the second month of the second year. Okay, so that tells us what day that is. Then on the 14th day of that month is second Passover. And that's, we'll see more about that in a moment. Okay, so let's read chapter 9, verses 1 through 14. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the first month of the second year after they come out of the land of Egypt. Okay, so giving us more dates. The Israelites are to observe the Passover at its appointed time. On the 14th day of this month at twilight, you are to observe it at its appointed time. You must keep it in accordance with all its statutes and all its customs. So Moses instructed the Israelites to observe the Passover. And they observed the Passover on the 14th day of the first month at twilight in the wilderness of Sinai, in accordance with all that the Lord had commanded Moses. So the Israelites did. It happened that some men who were ceremonially defiled by the dead body of a man could not keep the Passover on that day. Now remember, we talked about this. So I'm just standing here. I am ritually clean. I'm ready for whatever the Lord sends my way. And I'm walking down the pathway between the tents. And it's kind of crowded. And there's this guy has a heart attack, falls right into me. And all of a sudden, I am ritually unclean. Keep this in mind, not spiritually unclean, ritually unclean. That is, I am not in a position where I can bring something to the tabernacle. And I also can't eat the Passover. Okay? So it's ritual uncleanliness, not a spiritual condition. We need to keep that in mind. It happened that some men who were ceremonially defiled by the dead body of a man could not keep the Passover on that day. So they came before Moses and before Aaron that day, and those men said to him, "We are ceremonially defiled by the body of a dead man. Why are we kept back from offering the Lord's offering at its appointed time among the Israelites?" Notice it's an offering, not a sacrifice. So Moses said to them, "Remain here, and I will hear what the Lord will command concerning you." Now, one of the things we need to notice is, remember we've gotten the covenant law that said, okay, if this happens, you're going to be ceremonially unclean. And these guys come up with this situation where it's like, well, okay, we understand the law and the covenant we agreed to, and we're going, chapter 9, verse 6. We understand that we can't take the Passover, and there's a delivery person out there with flowers for somebody.
Where?
There was a person just walking up and down the hall looking for someone. It looked like I had a box of flowers.
Oh, it's me.
Yeah.
Probably need to go to the dorm would be my guess. But anyway, man, what kind of distractions today? Thank you, Sue Ellen.
Mhm.
I wish I had showed up.
So they recognize that they can't just celebrate the Passover with everybody else. So they say, okay, we've got to abstain. We're ritual unclean. But we just don't think that's right. We want to be a part of this celebration. We're a part of Israel. We want to participate in this worship experience. So what do we do? And so Moses says, you know, I didn't think of that. And God didn't tell me anything specific. So I'm just going to go into the tent. Now remember, Moses is the only one who goes in and out of the tent. I mean, for everybody else, the priests, it's a very prescribed ritual. Moses says, I need to talk to God about this. Whoop, into the tent. And he goes right into the Holy of Holies. Comes out, face shining, the whole thing. So Moses goes in and he talks to God about it. Says, God, I didn't think about this when we were getting the law. What do you think I ought to do? What do you want me to tell your people? So we see and we get kind of a little insight in here into how this conversation between God and Moses as the representative of God to the people, how that whole relationship worked. People come to Moses, they say, I've got a problem here, what am I supposed to do? Moses says, hang on just a minute, I'll go talk to God. He goes into the tent, into the Holy of Holies. He says, God, we didn't cover this in our last meeting. What should I do? And so he gets God's answer. He goes out, and what does he say? So, verse 9. The Lord spoke to Moses, tell the Israelites. Now, notice that God doesn't limit himself. Listen to what God says. The Lord spoke to Moses, tell the Israelites, if any of you or of your posterity becomes ceremonially defiled by touching a dead body or are on a journey far away, then he may observe the Passover to the Lord. He may observe it on the 14th day of the second month at twilight. They are to eat it with bread made without yeast and with bitter herbs. They must not leave any of it till the morning or break any of its bones. They must observe it in accordance with every statute of the Passover. But the man who is ceremonially clean, and was not on a journey and fails to keep the Passover, that person must be cut off from his people because he did not bring the Lord's offering at its appointed time. That man must bear his sin. If a resident foreigner lives among you and wants to keep the Passover to the Lord, he must do so according to the statute of the Passover and according to its custom. You must have the same statute for the resident foreigner and for the one who was born in the land. Now see what God did? He said, okay, Moses, I'm glad you asked. And you need to understand, I'm more concerned with people's attitude than I am with the feast itself. So if they want to keep part of this feast, and they're unable to for any reason, whether they're ceremonially unclean, or whether they're just not in Israel at the time of the Passover. So this is obviously looking forward to a time when they're in the land. So they're not in the camp, or in the land. They're away, or they're unclean for some reason. Then 1 month later, they get to keep the Passover. And then he goes a step further. And any resident foreigner among you, if he wants to, can keep the Passover. He just has to do it according to the same rules as everybody else. Now, the interesting thing to me is, if he wants to, he may. It's not he must. For the Jew, it's a necessity if you do not keep it by negligence, you have a problem. You have dishonored and disobeyed the covenant relationship, and God is going to exact a toll. There's a price to pay. Now, we don't know what that price is. Most scholars would say to be cut off means to be put to death. However, they all agree that we don't exactly know what that means. Okay? So, next slide. Notice God's provision of grace here. They know they ought to keep it. They know they can't keep it. They really want to keep it. God says, oh, let's do this. You do it a month later. That way you've had time to get past all of the things that would make you ceremonially unclean. You've got time for the 1 week to wait before you go to the priest and you bring the offering of 2 turtle doves and you know, all of the things that you would go through to present yourself as clean before the priests at the tabernacle. You've got time to do all of that. And now you can come back 1 month later and celebrate the Passover just as if it were the same night as everybody else. Now remember, this is a household celebration, so it's not something where you're out with everybody else anyway. This is something you do in your home as a family. So your whole family then can celebrate with you a month later. But not only that, if there's some reason you're simply not in the land, in the camp, or in the land of Israel when they occupy the land, if there's some reason you're not there, then you can also keep it the month later. God is going over and over and over and beyond to make provision for people who want to worship Him, including people who just live in the land.
Well, Bobby, it seems like it's more of a heart attitude than anything here.
We tend to look, don't we look at Old Testament laws and say, God had all these laws in the Old Testament. There was this angry God in the Old Testament, and He wanted you to obey these laws, or He was going to send you to hell, and by golly, that's all it was. And many religions teach that the God of the Old Testament is not the God of the New Testament, who's Jesus. And at the very least, they say, well, it's like God had a change of heart. Well, no, He didn't. He was looking for ways to bring people into relationship then, just exactly the way He is now. God wants relationship, so you're exactly right. He was extending grace, even to the point of saying, even if someone just lives in the land and wants to worship me, I want them. But here's the thing. I want you to notice that there's some specific things about this feast. It has connection with person, has connection with place, and has connection with time. So you don't get to do it when you want to. You do it when God says do it. If for some reason you, the person, can't do it on the time and in the place, you're either unclean in the right place or you're not in the right place. So if you, the person, can't do it at the right time in the right place, God makes provision for another time, but the right place. And if you're just in the land and you want to worship Him, then God says, you're the right person, and this is the time and place. Okay? So, the Passover observation is a function of these three: person, time, and place. If you were a Jew and not present, you could use the alternate date. If you were a foreigner and in Israel at the right time, you were permitted to participate, not required. If you're a Jew, it's required. Non-Jew, it's not. If you are a Jew and not in the right place, the camp, if you're a Jew and you're not in the right place, you can't participate, you have to wait until that 1 month later when you're in the right place. So you have to be the right person, a worshiper, and it has to be at the right time, and it has to be in the right place. Now, God is inviting people in, not excluding people. He's trying to find ways to get people in, not trying to find ways to keep people out. So when the difficulty comes along and you say, God, I really want to worship you, God is always finding ways to include, not finding ways to exclude. And so, to your point, yes, it is exactly that God is a God of grace. He's always looking for ways to draw people to Himself. And He desires our worship. There comes a time, Jesus says, when we will worship Him in spirit and truth. And then this little phrase that comes after, that we just kind of go, blow over it. Because this is the kind of person God is looking for, I paraphrase. You see, God's looking for something that He doesn't have. You think, God has everything. No. He wants people to want to worship Him. And He's looking for ways to draw people into worship. Go ahead.
Well, I've just been sitting here thinking the whole time, it's kind of like when we celebrate Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anybody that wants to celebrate with us, we want to bring them in and include them in the family,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because they've got the attitude of, you know, even if they're not exactly a Christian, at least they've got a warm heart toward that. You want to try to include them right. I mean, you know, but of course here, you know, I guess even the people that were foreigners that were with them believed in the God of Israel in a way. Mm-hmm. I just think that's it.
Okay. So, what are they doing at the Passover? I got 4 minutes. And yeah, it's okay if we only get half a chapter today.
They're eating the lamb.
Okay, so what's happening? And we're going to, when we see the Old Testament, this especially the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, when we see these books as the story of God's redemption, we start to see things in a little bit different light. Remember, the Passover is another fellowship meal. Okay? Because you eat it together as a family. And so we want to be in fellowship with God. And God Himself makes the provision to make it possible. He says, this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to celebrate your coming out of Egypt and your covenant with me every year. We're going to renew the covenant every year. And you're going to celebrate this by eating a covenant meal with me. So the Passover is another example of a fellowship meal. The lamb takes the place of the firstborn and is shared by the family, and nothing is left over until the next day. This is my body. Take. Eat. Just like Israel, if you neglect the Passover lamb, you are cut off. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. If you want to participate, God is working hard to make a way for you to participate. If you don't participate, the ones who were cut off are the ones who said, you know, Passover is just not that important to me. I am not going to renew my covenant with God. And God says, okay. And I'm not going to renew my covenant with you. What does cut off mean? It means not able to stay in the camp in the presence of God. So, if we neglect the Passover lamb, if we refuse the gift, if we refuse the invitation, even though we're not in the nation yet, but if we just acknowledge and accept the invitation to come and eat the meal, He includes us too.
And He makes a way.
Say what?
And he makes a way.
He always makes a way. And, let's pray. Father, thank you for always making a way so that we can participate in fellowship with you. Thank you for inviting us to the table. Thank you for providing a way and providing the Lamb, who is our Passover. Thank you for life, forever in your presence. In Jesus' name, amen.